Welcome to the second part of the Espresso webinars here. So last time we saw Dave's presentation about how we are doing the architecture in Qlik Cloud, where you have like one subscription, but you have an n number of tenants, so one tenant for each end customer, rather than sharing a tenant and control that by security rules. We also saw a demo on how you could spin new tenants up from an online form, just to give you an idea on how it could work. Today we'll go in and look at how the different endpoints can be used to set up a provisioning and hydration flow, as we saw from the form last time. It is important to know that we need a key for the source tenant or the OEM master tenant. Then we need an access key for creating new tenants. And then we need an access key for each and every customer tenant we provision. However, all those keys we can always request a key for each of those tenants and to create new tenants if we have the client ID and the client secret, which we saw on the last session. So let's jump right into it. Today we'll start at the Qlik OSS Qlik platform examples. You can see the URL here in the top of the screen, and then we will go into this platform operation example Postman. So when we're in here, then we can copy the content. It's in JSON format, and then we can go into Postman, and I want to close this one, and the easiest way to get it in is to say import raw text, paste in the JSON in the clipboard, and click import. And I got a warning because I already got a collection with the same name, but I would like to have a copy. And here we go. So here we have 4 different folders. See them in a second. There you go. Which I'll come back to in a second. But what's important before you start looking into the individual operation or the individual API calls, have to go in here on the collection, click on the 3 dots, do edit, and then look at the variables specified in here. So what we need to do here is to give the region, if you are in the EU, in the US, and so forth, the client ID and the client secret, which you could get from the portal, as we saw in the last session. The source tenant or the master tenant, where you have the app you want to copy from that tenant to all the customer tenants when you spin them up. The email address you're registered with in the source tenant. Key ID and issuer are being used when you create an IDP. So when we want to create a IDP, JWT IDP, then we need to provide those values. You need a public and a private key, which need to be pasted in here. If you don't have any, remember that you can use the integration.qlik.com under the cloud session demo. And if you move into that form we used last time, you can create a public and a private key there. However, remember before you paste them in here, make sure that you have removed all line breaks in the certificates. Otherwise, it won't work. So put it into an editor and remove the line breaks, or use an online page where you can remove line breaks. Then a group, that's the group we want to secure the space under, so that's just the group name. Then we have a managed space name and a shared space name, and the last thing is the name of the app we want to take from the source tenant and bring over, or a copy of we want to bring over to the customer tenants. So all these needs to be filled, and then you will see that while we are running through the collections, we will start adding more values in here to be used later on in the collection. So I'll just close this one here because I have one where I have pre-filled all the values. So let me just take that one up here. And what we can see, if I take the same three dots right here, sorry, edit, and I go variables, and here you can see I have all my values in here, so my source tenant, email address, and so forth. So let's try to go into the first folder. For those of you who haven't used Postman before, the good thing is that you can actually run an entire collection. So all the calls you got within a collection can be run at the same time. But then you can also create folders, and folders can also be run individually. So if I take this one and say run folder, it will only take the calls I got within that folder. So we have structured this in 4 different folders. So let me go into the first call here. What we can see is that we are taking these, this is the syntax to get the variables. So we take the source tenant here in the region where I'm in, and then we have this endpoint here to get access, to get an access token for the source tenant. In the body, we have the client ID and the client secret. Again, they're picked up from the variables. In the tests, we are taking that the test is running. We have tests running after the call, and we have prescript running before the call. We're not doing any prescript here, but we're running a test after. And what we do here is that we take the response. So the part of the JSON coming back, we need to use later on. So we store that into a variable. So if I send this call, we can see that the access token is coming back here as well as other things. And then we have now written that back into the collection variables. We will not go into that every time we do a call, but I can just show it to you right now so you have an idea. And you can see now the last, the value here, source access, what's it called? Source access token is coming in here, right? That was not there before. Good. Then we are accessing the source tenant, and for the authorization, we are using that token we just got in the 1.1 call here. And from that call, we need to pick the license key. So that's shared license key we have between all the tenants we have running under our subscription. So that license key thing we are saving in another variable to be used in a later call. So that was the access token for the source tenant. Then we need the access token to register a new tenant. So here we got the endpoint for that. That's called not the source tenant here, but instead register.region. And again, the body you put in here is the client secret and the client ID, and then the grant type client credentials. So when you run this, again, we get the token back, and we write the token into a register access token. And then this token needs to be used to create a new tenant. So the 1.4 call here, we will see that we call register in the region tenant. In the authorization, we are using the register access token, which we got from 1.3. And then we are giving in the body, we are giving the license key, which we got in the 1.2 call here. When that is done, we can see that we get the target tenant, the new customer tenant, so to speak. We got that name into a variable as well. So you can see here, we took the name from that, right? Then we have a last call where we are using the target tenant name. You can see that in the 4.1 call here, we save it in a value called target tenant. That target tenant we are using here. And then in the body, we have the same thing as before, the client ID, the client secret, and the client credentials. And then we run that, and now we got, again, a new access token, which can be used to access the target tenant. And this is just to test that we actually can access that tenant. Good. So the access token is target access token. So in 1.6 here, we take the target tenant. We are using the target access token there, and then we run it, and it will actually give us back a call just to show that we can communicate with that tenant. Now we can see that the new tenant name, if I go back, we can close all the tabs here, and I can go to the variables up here. The tenant name, new tenant name, let me see what it's called, is called VA5, right? So if I go to my browser here and I go into the to the account, there we go. What did I say here? I said VA5. So let's look, see where we got it. VA5, there it is. If I click on this, you'll see that I get an access denied. I cannot go into that tenant. And this is because we have not given any users access to that tenant by now. So that's what we're going to work on in the next folder. So what we do here, let me try to close this one again. And if we close the variables and we go in here. So then we say, just to make sure, because there is a timeout on the access tokens, and if it runs in a code sequence, you don't even have to do this again. But just to make sure, if you're running this with a little delay, then you will get the source access token again. So I'm requesting a new one, and then I use this get endpoint where I'm using the email address in one of the URL parameters to get the specific email I used in my source tenant. And then what I'm getting back from that call is the IDP subject and the IDP username for that specific user. So if I click on that, we can see that we are getting information about that user back again. And we are writing that into two different variables. Then we are again getting an access token for the target tenant. And then we are adding the user by using this endpoint up here to say that's under the v1 users with the body of the username, the IDP subject, and the email address, and we give that person the role tenant admin, right? So we are running to the VA5 still, so that's good, and we can run it, and we can see as an authorization here we're using the bearer token coming out of the target access token. It means that if I'm going back to the browser, go here and refresh. So there we go. And if we go to V5, where is it? It's right there. You can see now I have given the user access to that specific tenant. It's a good idea to use the same user as you have in your source tenant, because then it will only take one user license. So you're not using too many user licenses for these kind of admin stuff. Okay, back again. That was folder number 2. So now we'll go into the configure tenant folder. And here we will start getting an access token again, just to be sure. Same explanation as earlier. Then there's an auto create group creation. So what we're doing here is that we want to make sure that if a user will access the platform and is coming in with a JWT including groups, it will automatically create those groups. So this is not like that by default. So you have to set that up in the management console. Also, afterwards, we will make sure that the licenses are auto-assigned. So the user will get either a professional or a analyzer license by default when they log in. Let's try to move over to the management console before we do this. So I will go in here in the management console of our target tenant, and I'll move to the settings area. And what we can see here is that creation of groups is disabled. And also it says right now that we will automatically give professional user access to all new users. That is not necessarily what we want to do. If it is, you don't have to do anything. If it's not, then we can switch around on those two switches, right? So this is what we're gonna work on now. So let me try to go in here and I'll fire the first one. Okay, we got a that's fine. It's Apache, we got a 204, so that's good. And then we do like a put for configure the auto licenses, and we have set professional to false and analyzer to true. So now we run this one and we move back again to the management console. Let's go back to the settings. And what we can see here is now the creation of groups is turned on. And we are now dynamically assigned the analyzer users and not the professional user. Good. Then we get the ID for the target tenant because we need that at a later stage. So this call is just to, it's running through the target tenant region, and then it has a tenant endpoint. Again, target tenant access token, and out of that result, we are storing the target tenant ID from the response, right? It's right there, and it's written into that variable. Then this is a library we are loading from an external source from a GitHub, and this is only to create a JWT token later on. So what we do, we read this web page and we write the result of that web page into a variable. If you're doing this in your own code, then you can use any other libraries which are done for creating and signing JWT tokens. But for this, it's a good one to use just to test it. So we load that, and we got that piece of code into that variable right now, which we then can use later on. The reason why we want to do a JWT login at this point is that at the moment this is the way you can create a group, and we want to make sure that the group is created so we can secure our space with that group, right? So then we do a login with a JWT including that group, and then the group is created, and then we can later on secure the space with that group. So here what we do is that before we run this call, this is one of the places where we have a pre-request script. We are using that variable with the code. We have the private key from the variables. Then we have all the things we need in the payload, which will be explained in the next webinar in 2 weeks' time. But here you can see we explain it. We are defining it, and you can see in groups we have the group we defined in the collection variables. Then we create the JWT here, and we got the JWT back, and we write that into a variable. Good. So far, so good. Then we are creating the identity provider, and that identity provider is needs the target tenant ID, which we got in 3.4, the public key, which we have in a variable, the key ID, and the issuer, which we have in a variable as well. Remember the public key, no line breaks in that, then this call will fail. So we run it, and good, we got a 201 back. That's good. So we have now created the IDP provider in there. Then we are using the JWT we created in the previous call, and then we just hit this login /JWT-session, and then the JWT including the group will automatically hit the session and the group will be created. So I'll send that one, and it's got an OK back, meaning that we successfully logged in and the group is now created. If you don't want to use the JWT for additional authentication, it might be you will, or it might be you want to create another one, then you can delete the IDP in the management console again by running this one. But if you want to reuse it, just avoid this call. The group we have created, we are now use this get call to get that group, actually to get the ID of the group, because that's what we need to make sure that we later on secure our managed space by that. You cannot secure it by the group name, but you need the group ID. So we run this again. We have the target access token. We have the group here, the group name here as the URL parameter, and when we run it, then we take the group ID back into a variable called group ID. Okay. Then we're ready to create the shared space, which is a post call. Again, of course, target tenant, Body is shared space name. We had it in a variable, and the type is shared. And then we just get the shared space ID back. I'm not sure we're using it later on, but we got it. And then we do the same thing, exactly the same call. However, this is a managed space name, and of course the type is managed. And in this case, we are getting the ID back in the managed space ID, and that's important because now we want to secure that managed space with the ID of the group we created. So in this case, we have the managed space ID up here, and you have the group ID in the body, and then we say that the role for users coming in with that group will have the consumer role. So we'll fire that one, and there we go. The last part of this is to deploy the application. All the three first folders can be run actually in one sequence with no issues. That will work with no problems. But we come to a point where Postman cannot handle this, and I'll get back to that right now when we deploy the application. So what we're going to do now, we're going to get an access code to the source tenant because we want to pick up the application. Then we want to find the app. What is the app ID based on the name we have specified in a variable? So I will click here, and we now got the executive dashboard, and we got the ID back, and you can see that we're writing that back into the to the source app ID. It's a get call, so there's nothing in the body. Then we request an export path for that app. So we put in the ID of the app here, and we tell there should be no data in it, and it's the source tenant, of course. And what's coming back here is actually I will not go into detail here, but the information here is coming back in the header. And the header, then we will take some a variable from that header, and we need to do a little bit of split here to get what we need. And then we have the source app part right there. This is where we need to download the app from. And that is stored in that variable, which we then can see that we're using that app path here. And actually, if I take mouse over, you can see what that parameter is. So what I'm going to do here, and this is what it doesn't do if you run the entire folder itself, is send and download. So I'll send and download the file, and I got it in there. Good. Now we want to upload it to the target tenant. So just to make sure I get an access code or token for the target tenant, I go in here, and in the body, I'll select the app. So now we are importing the app into the target tenant. And the last thing we're going to do here is that we're going to publish the app. So we take the target app ID, which was in this 4.6, was written into the target app ID variable. And now it is published into the managed space, where we have the managed space ID from earlier. And then we have the target app ID up here, and we can do like send. And now we're kind of ending the circle here. So the two last things I want to show you here is, first of all, let me try to jump back into the target tenant we have worked with today. And then let me go to the analytic services. Then let me find the managed space we created. And here we can confirm that the application has now been placed into that space, which is done through the Postman collection. So that was kind of a confirmation for it worked like we wanted to. Let's jump back to Postman. So if you're downloading this Postman collection and get it set up with your own credentials and different IDs for source tenant and so on, then if you want to wrap it into code, then you can actually select each and every call here, and then you can see that here you can get code snippets for different code languages. And actually you get help to get this move into your preferred code language. I hope you liked this session about the Postman collection to get started with the APIs for Qlik SaaS and multi-tenancy. Now we will head back over to Q&A.